go ahead and get started. I think most people, we've seen a bit of slowing of people logging in, and I don't want to take up any more of your afternoon than I have to. So thank you all for joining me. This is our 2020 update for us. Now let me say I am recording this. We're going to share it later. I appreciate you guys showing up live because I'm going to give you a chance for questions. If you have questions, just put them in there while I'm teaching. Because this isn't really a lecture as much as just going through the stuff and being able to jump over and take a look at what's going on. So it's a lot less formal than we would do for a normal like webinar or class or whatever. And I'm going to go ahead and mute everyone. And if you'd rather ask your question, like it's just too much to type out and you want to ask your question, you can just say I have a question in the chat section, and then I'll open up the microphone so that we can hear you and you can ask your question. If it's something more simple, you can just go ahead and put it in the chat section so I can get to it as I take a break from each slide. So again, this is going to be our regulatory update. This is July. All these things that we're talking about right now go into effect on July 1st. And I am only doing a summary of the session. In other words, I'll send it out to everybody after this is recorded and edited this afternoon for you to look at with a full kind of brief from Virginia Realtors, and you can go look at the code section if you want to. So for those who are like, for example, property management, or if you are you represent landlords when you're listing property, there are a few other little caveats that I'm not going to go over because they don't affect the masses, and it will be more, more like Dawn's division has some property management VRLTA things that they're going to face more frequently than the rest of you will. So if you do list for landlords, you may want to go read those sections on your own. But I'm covering most of the big stuff, actually all the big stuff, and there's a few other things. Like there's a clarification statement now if the principal broker dies or becomes incapacitated, how that system works. I don't think most of you really care about the mechanics of that. And then there was a lot of legislative things that were just basically cleaning up old or antiquated language that was problematic that needed to be cleaned up before. I'm also not covering some of the things that Virginia Realtors have pushed out about COVID-19 governmental shutdown procedures and protections, because when that happens, I will do another live stream. We're talking specifically about what the rules say and how that works. I didn't feel like we need to do it today because some of the rules that do affect real estate will only be triggered if the government shuts down fully, or in a, like the court shutting down type thing. Some protections were drafted for that. So those types of things I'm not covering. So I'm going to jump right in here. We'll start with home association changes. The big HOA change for 2020 is that by statute, the buyer was given 3 days upon the delivery of HOA docs to review them and elect to terminate the contract unilaterally if they didn't like something or anything about it. They could just get out at any point. They could also terminate at any point prior to delivery, just saying, I'm getting out my HOA docs. And so this is why we have encouraged you strongly over the years to do everything possible to have those HOA docs even before you anticipate getting a contract so that you can deliver them. Like 2 weeks ago or so, I ratified a contract. Literally that night I delivered HOA docs right after delivery, right after ratification was delivered. And the buyer's agent response is, well, I guess we don't have that way out, huh? That's the point. That's why we're doing it. So those things all remain in place. What has changed is the option to negotiate a period longer than 3 days. So the standard has been 3 days. It has been like that for 3 decades. Now you can negotiate longer than 3 days, but no longer than 7. The rules of the HOA have remained the same in that the buyer cannot waive their right for those documents. And so you can't the seller can't say, hey, we'll sell to you, but one of the conditions is we're going to make you waive the HOA doc. Because we have 16 offers on the table. This is how you become more aggressive in your offer. That's never been an option. The seller retains that right to terminate always by statute. It cannot be negotiated away. The default is 3 days. If you want more than 3 days for the review period, it'll need to be negotiated in the contract as part of the ratification process. But again, by statute, it can't be any longer than 7 days. I honestly, I don't know of too many situations we run into where 3 days was more than 3 days was needed. Generally, what happens, the bigger problem is the buyer somehow feels like the full package wasn't delivered and now they want more time to review new things. That was already in the statute, that if the full document wasn't delivered, you get an additional 3 days when new documents are introduced, if they're required by statute. So again, it can now be negotiated greater than 7 days. So I reached out to Standard Forms Committee at NVAR to say, is this going to be an option in the contract or the forms? And they honestly said, we don't know yet. There is 50% of the committee says just leave it at 3, and everybody should just know if they need more than 3, they can insert it in there. Some of them are saying, let's add a blank that says the buyer seller agree to X number of days, not to exceed 7 and no less than 3, and then you have to pick a day. From a practical standpoint between you and I mean, most of you have a HOA docs know about that thick. And even if you look at a Coldwell Harbor, where they've just added a page after page after page every day for the past 30 years, they're fairly thick, but most buyers are just going to skim through them anyways and go there. I don't know too many who need 7 days, especially when they're emailed. And if I were you, clearly as a listing agent, I'm not going to want to see more than 3 days. Buyer agents, maybe you have a good reason to ask for more. Just understand that even as a buyer agent, you're working against a clock. So if your buyer says, I need 7 days, and you're doing a 30-day closing, 1/4 of your time is now wide open after delivery. And so you really want both buyers, listing and buyer agents, want to close that as much as possible. The other thing from HOAs is that property owner association documents now have to have a specific statement in that says whether or not political signs are permitted to be placed in front of the house in homeowner associations. And at first I read that, I'm like, okay, that's kind of silly. Who needs to know that? Well, the reality is we're in a world where everybody now has considered their political party a new religion or cult. And so they are taking these things very, very seriously. And across the country, across the state rather, there have been a number of issues where communities have said, no, you can't have a political sign. And apparently, I was just talking to an attorney yesterday who said there were 2 civil suits in the past 12 months from people who are saying it is a violation of their civil liberties to not be able to promote their political party preference in their front yard. And so HOAs were told if it's part of their document and it was part of the rules that were known to the homeowners, then the homeowners association has the right to enforce it and say, no, you can't have any signs in the yard. So now it's become part of the disclosure packet. It's up to you whether you're going to sit down with your buyer and go, by the way, you really need to look for this clause about political signs in there. There's so many of those things, we could go crazy if we sit down and outline every single thing they should consider. But you do need to know that beginning July 1st, any HOA doc that are delivered to new potential buyers and the updates sent out to homeowners has to address whether or not political signs are permitted. The anticipation of this is now that it has to be closed is going to be the impetus for which HOAs are going to start having a discussion going, you know what, I'm really sick and tired of seeing signs in people's yard, and there's enough politics, and I just think we shouldn't do it anymore. So the anticipation is that people are going to actually, now that they're triggered to have to make a rule about it, are going to fall on the side of probably restricting them because they do look like garbage and nobody really cares. And I don't know about you, I've never driven by and went, I was going to vote for so-and-so, but I saw a sign out front, damn, I'm going to switch up my vote. It's not what normal people do. So, and if you're that easily swayed, you shouldn't be voting anyways, but just my opinion. Okay, so that's HOAs. The next one, change in fair housing. And I talked to a couple of people about this who were a little surprised this wasn't already a thing. In 2 regards. The first one is the lawful source of funds being protected. I've already gotten phone calls from a couple of you or text messages from a couple of you saying, this is BS. I shouldn't have to do this. My landlord doesn't have to do this, blah, blah, blah. I look back, and from every fair housing class I've taught since 2005 until today, so 15 years of fair housing classes, I've had a slide in there that talks about source of funds being a questionable restriction. And when I say questionable restriction, what I mean is that if a homeowner says, I don't want to accept that buyer because, for example, Section 8, or that tenant because of Section 8, they have to have made that decision for every single tenant. And there were some people who were saying, no, 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 I'm not taking Section 8 because of, for example, the kind of people who use that, or people who don't have money, or whatever it is. We have talked many times in our classes about being very careful, even though it wasn't a restricted issue or protected issue, and how you conversed with your landlords or your clients about it. Starting July 1st, if your landlord has more than 5 homes in which he is renting, he or she is no longer able to reject tenants based on where they're getting their income. So, for example, if they are Section 8 housing, they cannot be rejected because they're Section 8 if the landlord is renting more than 5 properties, has more than 5 investment properties. If you're representing a tenant, you're probably not going to know how many homes that landlord has. So you're going to be dependent on the property manager or the listing agent to address this. If you are a listing agent for a landlord, and let's say he doesn't want property management, and you are going to be representing him or her, you have the question to go, how many homes are you renting? And if it's more than 5, they're going to be obligated to take Section 8. My strong guess is that probably 4 units. Sorry, is it the 5th unit, Dawn? Dawn is sending me corrective messages.
It is 4 units total.
Okay. So was that modified? Because I'm looking here at VAR's thing they just sent out, and I thought it said the 5th property.
I'm going to dig real quick and get clarification on that, because every conversation that we've had, it's if they own, let me go check. I'll verify. Okay.
Okay. Right. So Dawn's going to go check before, because I think it's supposed to be tying into VRLTA. And so I took those notes right out of VAR's update. I'm looking at it now.
It's written if owner does not own more than 4. So that would be the 5th, I guess.
Okay, yeah, both of the notes I have and the meeting notes that VAR put out there say 5. We'll get clarification for you guys. So let's go with 4 because that's more conservative. No, I think it is once they enter into the standard if it's the 5th house in which they're renting. Let me check again. Yeah, Dawn, if you would get some clarification for me, because what I have here, both in their slide deck, which is not the one I'm using, it's the really crappy one they sent out, and in their notes it says 5. And actually, I think that's what it said in the code section too. Let's go read that real quick. It's under House Bill 6, right? I'm reading the House bill. It actually says the 5th too. All right, we're going to find out. Right now, stick with 5 because that's what I see in all 3 of these sources. All right, yeah, we got our stuff together. All right, cool. All right, the next thing. So that's your source of funds. Again, think Section 8, but not only Section 8. There are other source of funds. And here's the most important word, because here's the conversation. Owns no more than 4, so I'm in the 5th. Okay, yep. Dawn's sending me the updates here. Yeah, so 5 houses. It's 5 residential. Michael, to your question, it's 5 residential properties. Okay, so here's the thing. The argument against this, there's actually in Virginia, it was actually out of Dumfries, about 5 or 6 years ago. There was a lady who said no to tenants renting a property, and they filed a fair housing suit because they felt like she was saying no because of their race. She said no, and she documented it to them, by the way. The fair housing complaint was dismissed. She said no to them because they were paying a year in advance in cash, and when she emailed them and said, can you share with me where you got this money, they said no. And she goes, well, if you can't prove it was by legal means, I'm not renting the property to you. And so there was really no solid legal precedence for this. And the court said, we agree with her. She didn't say no because of a fair housing issue. She said no because they couldn't prove where they got the money from. And she assumed that it may have been illegal efforts. And so the argument went back and forth. She won, and the court said it's not a protected class. It is still not a protected class in that regard. So when we're talking about section or this lawful funds, it is still not inappropriate for a landlord to go, are you working? How long have you worked there? And to find out a little bit about their job or their career to make sure they're making a secure decision. The statute says legally provided funds. So if that person has a criminal history of drug dealing and they have 2 years worth of rent ready to just put down in cash, the landlord's probably still going to have to, the landlord's not going to have to say, okay, we're going to rent with you because I'm not allowed to discourage or say no. They could say no in a criminal history as long as they're consistent with all tenants. So understand that it's pretty straightforward when it comes to Section 8. If that's the sole reason why the landlord's saying no, I'm just not sure that that's always going to be the sole reason. If you get stuck, if you've got a landlord who says, I'm not accepting Section 8 and they've got more than 5 units, call me, call your broker. We'll go from there. The next protected class isn't really new to us. Realtors in January of 2010 were bound by Article 10's update in the Code of Ethics that says we will treat all persons the same under these protected categories, and additionally added sexual orientation. Virginia has added sexual orientation and also gender identity as a protected class now. And again, it's not really going to change a whole lot about what we do, other than now it's not just a realtor protected class, it is for every licensee in the state. Next is the status as a military veteran. And actually, Dawn, if you've got something to add to this, maybe you can clear it up. I've asked a couple people if there was this overwhelming exclusion by landlords to say, if you serve in the military, you're not allowed to rent here. And no one seems to know that that's actually a problem. So there was a couple other things that were created as protected, or not protected classes, but additional benefits to our vets in Virginia. And I think this is one more thing that was slipped in there. However, I was asking about Virginia. There was a case outside of Virginia a few years ago in which a landlord refused to rent to veterans because the prior tenant had PTSD and actually became violent and harmed somebody in this unit. It was an apartment building. And so he would refuse to rent to military people, as if there wasn't the potential for anybody to have a violent moment. But I don't know that in Virginia we've actually had any real issues with this. I think it was part of that whole, let's find all the ways we can benefit our vets package that was delivered throughout there. So Don, if you have any insight, you can let me know, but I don't know we've had too many landlords saying I won't rent to military or former military, typically the preferred. A question here. So can a landlord refuse a Section 8 app if the potential tenant does not meet the credit score rate? Yes, correct. That's Suzanne, that's great. Yeah, they have to meet all the other standards of renting. So they may have to have a job, or they may have to have a clean criminal history or a good credit score or other things. They still have to have deposits. It would be this one thing they can't reject. Okay. And then there was a change, more for PC, I think, than anything else. It's no longer handicap status, it's now disability. So we're gonna have to change our little acronym as to the protected classes in our teaching, but that really doesn't change anything else. So anywhere that you would have seen handicap as a status, it is now disability. All right, any questions about fair housing? Groovy. Virginia Landlord Tenant Act. This is just a monster of legislation in general. Like, reading through it it's compared to most other Virginia licensing regulations, it's pretty expansive. So a couple things here to remember. Prepaid rents need to go in escrow. That, again, is not something you're dealing with too very often. But if someone's paying 2 or 3 months in advance, there are escrow policies you need to follow. The late fees cannot exceed 10% of each month's rent, and non-material compliance. So this one's a little more complex. And again, Don, you can jump in here if I don't have this 100% correct. If your tenant claims that there or shows evidence that there is a material defect in a home, like it's the middle of winter and heating doesn't work at all, and it doesn't work at all, and the tenant notifies the landlord, and the landlord goes, yeah, okay. And then 14 days go by, the landlord has not taken any action to correct or mitigate the material. And I'm underlining in your slides the word material, because it can't just be some little thing they don't like. There's got to be something that is a health or safety issue. If they don't mitigate it, then the tenant can have it mitigated, and they can recoup actual cost of the mitigation up to $1,500 or 1 month's rent, whichever is higher. So it'll never be less than $1,500 is the cap of their what they get back. Again, this is not something you and I are normally going to deal with. Like if you're out here as a regular agent not doing property management, and a tenant calls up and says, hey, my landlord isn't responding to me, my heat isn't working, that's an attorney question that should not be something you and I are answering. But just so you know, because it will impact other things. Again, if they're not your client, you shouldn't be answering this question. Send them off to an attorney. But if they are your client and the landlord has existing tenants, for example, and you're trying to rent it out, you may get asked this question. The tenant does have the option to go get work done and then get compensated or recover it. Now remember, if the landlord doesn't recover it, this is giving them the option to sue the landlord. It's not immediate. They are not allowed to withhold their rent. If they do have a just cause for not paying the landlord their rent, which is more rare than you think, there are obligations in which they can go pay it to a courthouse and have it held in escrow pending some type of civil action. There's other things they can do, but they can't just withhold it and not pay it because they're not getting their way and things aren't being fixed. So that the material non-compliance issue is something that may come up. I do think it's a good tenant protection. At least it's an option for more immediate action in case you have a kind of a deadbeat landlord. Again, we deal typically with property managed properties. Property managers are usually on top of this. I don't see us really dealing with that too much. The residential disclosure issue, there's some changes. And let me just start at the bottom of the slide. I want to put it in perspective. Remember that Virginia is a non-disclosure disclosure state. In other words, our obligation to disclose things to buyers is that we are not disclosing things to buyers. Instead, what the disclosure form says is go to this webpage at DPOR and look up all the things we're not disclosing to you that you should be getting checked out. How many of you have had buyers who have actually gone to the DPOR webpage and looked through the list of things that they're not being disclosed? To put in perspective, when that law went into effect a few years back, NVAR put out a new form with the DPOR link to that site. 4 months after the form went out, one of our agents said, Matthew, have you ever checked the link? I'm like, no. She goes, it doesn't go anywhere. It was 4 months from the time that the link was created, it broke. And then somebody found out the link broke. That tells you how many people in 4 months bought and sold homes in Virginia and never went to the site. Here's what they're adding. On that long list of things on the DPOR website in which we are telling the buyer that we're not telling the buyer, they've added marine clay, radon gas, building energy analysis, lead pipes, and dams on property. So this is not, I don't want you guys to get confused here. This is not to say that if you, the agent, know about it, you don't have to disclose it. That's not what it's saying. If there is a dangerous or a level of radon gas in excess of the EPA guidelines in your listing and you know about it, you are obligated to make that disclosure. What we are telling the buyers is we are not doing radon tests. We don't know about any radon problem, whatever. Now, lead pipes is a newly added one. I think there's some actually effect to property management. The landlord or property managers now have to disclose if they know about lead pipe in the property. So do you as a listing agent. If you know about lead pipe, because that is a health and safety issue, you know about it, you have to disclose it. But if you don't know about it, you don't have to inspect it. That's not what this is saying. All right. Okay, so this is, again, going from the bottom up. The next bullet point is the form now has to be signed by a buyer. So if you've taken my classes before, I've talked about this probably more often than we needed to, because because we've had this issue happen. Up until July 1st of this year, if I delivered, the code section said I only have to deliver to you the disclosure form saying that I'm not disclosing anything to you. Everybody follow? We just had to deliver it. It didn't say it had to be signed. It didn't say it had to be recognized or acknowledged. Now, starting July 1st, it will be a requirement for a buyer to sign that residential property disclosure and deliver it back to the seller assigned in order to meet the standard of the law. If it is not done that way, if you send it over as part of your, so you're the listing company and you put it in your MLS and the offer comes in and it's not attached to it and you ratify your offer, the buyer has 3 days from the time that it's delivered to them to terminate the contract just because you didn't deliver it as part of the ratification package. That's always been the case. What it's saying now is that contract remains open until the buyers have signed and delivered that document. If they refuse to sign, you got problems. So again, I would be very careful to not consider the contract ratified without the residential property disclosure signed by the buyer and returned. That's normal. That's what 99.9% of all of our transactions already do. But there are a couple agents who knew this rule well enough and they were like, I'm just gonna have the buyer sign it. And then we have this 3-day opportunity to terminate anytime we want. That's not how that worked before. It is how it's gonna work now. And then lastly, if you know that on your subject property, not adjacent to or anywhere else, but on the subject property what you're selling, if you or the sellers know that there's a stormwater retention pond, which is the picture you see in the slide, you'll see variations of that. If it is on the property, you must disclose it to the buyer. And you know, generally speaking, if you've got your typical 1 acre, half acre, quarter acre, if it's there, you're gonna know about it. You're gonna see it, it's gonna be clear. But if you've got large sections of property that may border a subdivision or something else, they may have placed one on the property, you now have to disclose it. I don't know that we're gonna have, if your client's walking by and sees this big concrete pillar in the middle of a pond, they probably recognize it and saw it. It's only if it's gonna be obscure that you're gonna have any real issue. Additionally, your septic inspectors, this is something that is going to impact a lot of us, especially if those of you who are just doing walkovers. Sorry, I just saw Benita's comment. Apparently this is waterfront in some areas of the state. Anyways, we call it a mosquito trap. Anyways, so what is changing if you were doing walkovers only? Now with our contract changes a couple of years ago, we started delineating exactly what a septic inspection was. So who's been doing this for a long time, remember, it was basically you walked over, you went, doesn't smell like poop, it doesn't look like there's poop on the ground, it must be a great working septic system. And then the contract said, now we're gonna do some other things to make this much more clear. And now what has happened is the law has said those people doing this must have either their on-site storage or sewage operator license, an on-site sewage system installer license, or an on-site soil evaluator license. Our contract has already said it needs to be, our contract has already said that it needs to be a professional, and now what we're doing is giving definition of what professional means. In cases where your clients are attempting to negotiate something down, so let's say the buyer and seller negotiate, which actually last year somebody brought this one to me. The buyer and seller were attempting to negotiate the contract, and the seller was trying, it was multiple offers, the seller was trying to save some money, and they had, Carol, were you in an accident? Are you okay? Your car's upside down. Carol's out drinking and driving again. All right, so if your client is just doing a walkover and you negotiated like you were, people were negotiating, the termite company will do a walkover. Even the walkover now requires some level of licensure in order to comply with the state. So you can't just negotiate that in a contract and go, my termite guy, Harry, who's been doing this for 50 years, so let's walk over, make sure it's okay. It actually has to meet that criteria. Grantor's tax, I don't know that a lot of agents knew this, but the grantor tax by statute was a requirement of the seller to pay. It wasn't something you could negotiate out. So in other words, you're gonna sell your house, you the seller have to budget in for the grantor's tax. As of July 1st, this will be negotiable. The buyer or seller can agree to, that the buyer will pay some, maybe they'll pay half, maybe they'll pay all, whatever. It can be however you negotiate it. Remember, that's 1% of the sales price in Virginia. Additionally, if you are Prince William or north, you have the transportation tax. And so the transportation tax also is a requirement for the seller to pay. As of July 1st, it is something they can negotiate. I know that Northern Virginia Association was lobbying for this. They were already training and speaking to this in their conferences and classes. So that my guess is now when you have multiple offer situations, you should probably anticipate a counter offer from the seller to the buyer to say, hey, we got 17 other offers. If you want to be in the first place, one of the things we're going to counter on is you're going to pay the transportation tax and you're going to pay the grantor's tax. By chance, anybody remember what the grantor's tax is? What percentage of the sales price? Okay, you didn't know you're going to get a pop quiz. Great. It's 1.5%, up to 1.5%, and 1% for your sales tax. So you could actually have a buyer who's being asked to pay 2.5% in taxes in addition to all their other costs in order to be more competitive against the seller. So there you go. You're welcome. Good luck with that. If, yep, 1.5% per 1,000. So remember that with the grantor's tax and the transportation tax, if there's a negotiation in which the buyer is anticipated to pay for it, and and you go to closing and whoops, somebody forgot to put it on the ALTA and it just didn't get paid, the state will go back after the seller, regardless of what your contract said, and go after the seller to pay for the transportation tax or the grantor's tax. So if you're the listing agent and the buyer has agreed to pay those taxes, you need to make damn sure at closing that they are on the settlement statement and they are paid, or otherwise your seller and no one, the state is not going to care about what you agree to the buyer. You ultimately are responsible for paying those taxes. So again, be very clear. I don't know what MVAR is going to do with this. I don't know if they're going to make it just a standard form says the seller's just paying their own tax, or they're actually going to make it an option in the contract. They don't know. We'll see. Okay. Any questions about grantor's taxes, transportation taxes? July 1st. So yeah, all of the things that we're talking about today are July 1st changes. Now, just as an aside, NVAR standard forms, back when I was chairing it and for the 6 years I was on it, we only released forms twice a year, in January and in June, or July rather. And in July's delivery was for regulatory changes. January releases were for operational and administrative changes. The current chair and the current, it's a whole new, the attorney's different, everybody on staff is different there. The current chair, they're just pushing stuff out whenever they make the changes instead of waiting for a cycle. So as you all know, I just did a video on all the form changes that came out, last month or the month before. We are going to get more changes in the forms on July 1st. Many of them are going to reflect some of the changes here. And so I just late last night was talking to one of the committee members, and they said they honestly don't know if they're going to make the grantor's tax optional or just say the seller pays for it and it can be negotiated instead of putting like an open form. The reason that's important to you is anytime you have a blank, it triggers your buyer or seller to want the other side to pay for something, right? You're all with me. So I am hoping that they'll go HOA docs 3 days. Oh, by the way, you can negotiate this, and not leave a blank for people to use their imagination as to what they want. But we don't know. We'll see what the forms committee comes up with. VREB, the Virginia Real Estate Board and the association did work on some other things that may or may not be important to you. Number one is the associations now, the regulation has been changed so that a realtor, or any association of members can now work with Virginia health insurance providers to attempt to get group health insurance for association members. So in other words, if you don't have health insurance now, or if you're paying for it out of your pocket and it's outrageous, the Realtor Association is attempting to negotiate group and reduced fees for members of the Realtor Association. Now, there have been several attempts. We even had a credit union for NAR for a while, for those been around for a while. Remember, I think they still have my $5 that I used to start up my credit union account. And they went bye-bye. Nobody was using them. They couldn't stay afloat, and that went away. But that credit union was attempting to do the same thing. All this law is, it is not a promise for health insurance. All it is changing the law to permit groups to attempt to negotiate with health insurance providers to get better rates or group coverage. So I'm not really ready to take a victory lap until we see that actually come to fruition. This is just the ability by law to do it. Second of all, VREB has streamlined the reciprocity process for military. So if you have a friend or family member who's looking to get licensed in Virginia and they're licensed in another state, they can transfer here through reciprocity. To be honest with you, the process of reciprocity is about a 2 to 3 week process in Virginia. It's never been really that arduous anyways. And because Virginia's pre-licensing standard is fairly low compared to most other states, almost every other state's pre-licensing class was superior. And so Virginia would say, okay, yeah, all right, great. You can just come get your license in Virginia. And it took about 2 to 3 weeks. VREB, the regulations were changed to direct VREB to streamline that process and make it as fluid and as quick as humanly possible. Now, let me just say this. We don't know what that looks like. So maybe it's 2 weeks instead of 3 weeks. My position is if Virginia has the ability to streamline reciprocity, why aren't we doing it for everybody? But that's whatever. And I say that because I don't know that they have the ability to. This regulation is simply directing them to make a more fluid and quicker system than what they currently have. VREB is never really known to be, they're still stuck in 1950, so they're doing the best they can. But I don't know really, I'm not sure how it's going to land, but it's something you're going to hear about. This affects all of you on here, but it is not in the real estate category as much as just Virginia license or Virginia law. Up until now, for the past, I think it's 5 years, we have been a hands-free state, which means you can talk on a phone, but you have to do it through hands-free devices and you can use the phone that way. And it was not if you got in an accident and it was like, oh yeah, I was using my phone, then it was a violation. If somebody caught you texting on your phone while you were driving, then there had to be some reckless driving or distracted driving to go with that. In other words, they could not just pull you over, give you a ticket or a summons because you had the phone in your hand. As of July 1st, you're not allowed to touch any communication device while you're driving. So you can't hold your phone in your hand. You can't switch through your favorite Spotify or audiobook, GPS, nothing. If you are on a public highway and the vehicle is not in a parking lot somewhere, you're not allowed to touch your device. Abby, you look very disappointed at this. So my 2 cents is become left-handed, just hold it down here next to the door. You're perfectly fine. No, I'm kidding, kind of kidding. No, you're not allowed to use your device or touch it at all. The state police have already said, even having in the holder on your dashboard, if you reach up and touch it, that qualifies under this regulation, that the number of traffic accidents, injuries, and even deaths related to distracted driving and devices is so substantial that they have created a law to say you're not allowed to have it in your hand at all while you're operating the vehicle. Then this last one doesn't apply to everybody, but to some. We have talked about this many times before from just a good practice standpoint. Now it is the law in Virginia. Every employee that is hired, so if you hire an administrative assistant as an agent, you were able to sit down with them and go independent contractor versus employee, and let's have an agreement for one or the other. Independent contractor, you need to meet these 5 criteria from IRS. Remember, as an independent contractor with a real estate license, you're an entirely exempt class. IRS has a whole set of rules that say real estate agents who are independent contractors are different than other independent contractors. We're not talking about you, the agent, being an independent contractor. We're talking about who you're hiring and that independent contractor status. In Virginia now, the default will be employee. So if you want to hire an assistant, and hire means giving anything of value in return for work. So I noticed earlier, I think it was Sarah Hurst put out a email that says she had somebody who's interested in interning. If that is an unpaid internship, this doesn't apply to you. But if you are hiring somebody even part-time, you are going to have to consider them an employee, and you're going to have to pay them and do tax withholdings and all the other employee type things that you would do. Now, if they want to be an independent contractor, it has to meet the IRS standard, which almost no real estate agent I've ever met hiring an assistant meets. In other words, they have to be able to work for more than one agent. They have to make their own hours, they have their own equipment, use their own discretion in how work is done, etc. So anybody who is compensated for work has to be, for like an assistant, starts from the position of being an employee, and then you have to do all the other things that are appropriate. If you want to be an independent contractor, call me, because I promise you it is unlikely under the IRS standards that you're going to be able to classify any longer an assistant in real estate as anything other than employee. And that means, again, tax withholdings and other benefits that normally you would grant to an employee. What it does here is it also creates a right to sue for an unpaid worker. So if you have had them in independent contractor status as opposed to an employee status, let's say you've been doing that for the past year and you're paying them a straight up $20 an hour, not doing withholdings, they could actually come back and sue you now. They have the right to sue you for any labor, like if they were working 60-hour weeks and you were just paying them $40 as an independent contractor, they could sue you for the 20-hour difference. They can sue you for withholdings you should have had or anything else, like vacation time they should have been allotted. If they're part-time, there's some things you don't have to do. You still have to withhold taxes and treat them like an employee. This is not a service we offer, but there are services out there, your CPA, ADP, some other services that allow you to pay that service, and then they take care of all the employee status for your assistants and administrative assistants, marketing specialists, and all the rest. But again, Virginia law is not going to say they start as an employee. If you want to be an independent contractor, you have to prove they meet the criteria, which is really hard to meet. And if you don't do all those things, they have the right to come back and sue you for any damages that they have suffered. What is unclear to me is whether that is forever and ever and ever, or just after July 1st. More than likely, it's only after July 1st. But because I did not see a provision that gives them back authorization for civil suits. All right, so that is the legal update. I did tell you about 45 minutes. I'm right there, but I'm going to answer a few questions if you have them. Putting up signs, is that considered an employee? So it's solely putting up signs. They can act as an independent contractor so long as they meet other criteria. Again, are they able to? They don't have to. Are they able to work for other people? Are they providing their own vehicle and equipment and tools and resources, and you're just giving them the sign saying pick it up and go put it out there? You're probably okay. That's a limited scope effort you're hiring on the side. It is not treating them like an employee where you have expectations as to time and dates and all the rest. So it's probably a different animal. And if you're married to them, nobody cares. You can work them like a mule. All right. Any other questions, comments? Nothing? Oh, Abby is either tickling her camera or she's typing. I can't tell what's going on there. Anything? Okay, I'm gonna give just a second because there's a 45-second delay here. I just want to make sure I'm waiting long enough for questions. What about having a licensed real estate agent work for you? Okay, so Nick, this is a great question. I get it a lot. What is the capacity of the person who's working for you? If they are functioning as a real estate agent, they are showing buyers and sellers, and they're showing buyers and sellers property, they're doing marketing, they're taking listings, they just happen to be part of your team, they're covered under the IRS exemption for real estate agents. But if they are there doing administrative tasks and they happen to be licensed, they're an employee. And again, we have a whole policy on this, but do remember, if you as an agent are paying an assistant, even if they're licensed, they have to be part of your business entity license in order for you to compensate a licensed person, again, even if they're acting as an employee. So if you are employing somebody as an assistant who happens to be licensed, let me know and we'll figure out the best way to get around, not to get around, I don't want to say that on recording, to keep you in compliance with the rules. We'll say it that way. All right, any other questions? Nope. All right, guys, it's a beautiful day. Thank you for spending some time with me this afternoon and getting updated. And go out and do something. Get some fresh air, get out of the office. Just don't go touch anybody or breathe on them or be within 6 feet of them, whatever. All right, bye guys, have a great weekend.